Well, joining me live is the Employment and Workplace Relations Minister, Tony Burke. Tony Burke, thanks so much for your time this morning. Let me start with this announcement.
Great to be here, and if I can say, well, sorry,
Go on.
I was just going to say Happy Easter to the whole. I was out very late last night with a whole lot of the Greek Orthodox community, but it's Easter for a lot of Orthodox people out there today, and just wanted to wish them a happy Easter.
Yes, and from me too, and I guess you've put your excuse in there early if you slip up during this interview, Tony Burke. A very late night for you with Greek Easter.
It wasn't a lot of sleep, I'll tell you.
OK, well, let's start with this announcement concerning HECS debt. This is a big reduction in debt, but students are still copping some inflation on their debt, whichever index you use. And I guess in a way it's not immediate relief because it's their long-term debt that's reduced. It's not like their payments are.
Oh, yeah, but you've got to remember interest repayments, they're cumulative, particularly for students who haven't yet met the income threshold where you start paying this down. So, you know, to be wiping $3 billion worth of debt for 3 million Australians, it's a big decision and a big call, but it's based on a really simple principle. Students work hard because they want to be able to get ahead. They don't want to be saddled with unreasonable levels of debt. And what happened, as we've been getting inflation to moderate from where it was in that final quarter before we came to office, it means that there's been, particularly in that last year, a really disproportionate increase in what otherwise was going to be added to people's individual accounts for debt. So, for the average student, this is $1,200 that gets wiped. But if you're at the income level at the moment where you're not paying it back, the ultimate savings end up being significantly more than that.
Well, the independent Monique Ryan's claiming credit today. She says she got $280,000 to sign a petition and it's her idea.
Oh, look, there's no doubt that Monique Ryan has pushed really hard on this. I've sat there in question time, as you have, and heard the questions and heard the issue being raised. So there's no doubt that she's agitated really strongly for that. The government's really pleased to be making this decision. It'll make a difference for students. It'll make a difference for young people. And young people want to be able to get the debt down as quickly as they can so that they can get on with the next phase of their life, and this helps them be able to do that.
Is this part of a pitch to young people in this budget to attempt to keep them away from voting Greens?
Look, there's no doubt that young people have been raising this issue. There's no doubt. And there's also no doubt that the last year was a really unusual situation. Two things had been happening in the economy on quite different trajectories when we came to office. The first is that inflation had suddenly started soaring, and the second is that wages had been flatlining. What we've been doing, and those two lines have finally crossed, so we're at the beginning, only the beginning of people starting to feel the difference there. But it means you had a year like last year where, as we were still getting wages up and getting inflation down and getting inflation to moderate, where you just had a stark difference between the two figures. And so, that's an unusual situation, what happened last year. But we haven't just changed the policy going forward, we've wiped out the impact of what happened last year.
Just on the wage price index, one of the measures potentially being used here, the latest figures show wage growth in Australia at 4.2%. It was an increase in wages of 0.9 for private sector and 1.3 for public sector workers in the last quarter. Now, interest rates just won't be cut with that sort of wage growth if it continues, will they?
I think there's a problem that some people want to lean in really quickly and always blame work. I'm not saying this is you, Andrew. I'm glad you put the question to me. But a lot of people want to lean in and always blame workers for inflation and say, oh, no, it's your fault. The reality is, and just look at what's been happening, at the same time that wages growth has gone from flatlining to sustainable growth, inflation has been moderating. That's exactly what has been happening. And every year, when we've been saying that the real wages of the low-paid workers should not go backwards, there's been some people who've argued that people on low incomes, on modest incomes, need to take a pay cut, and they've always said that, oh, this is the only way we can get inflation down. What the government's been doing is seeing inflation moderate by providing responsible cost of living relief in a way that doesn't add to inflation.
It is sticky, though, inflation, isn't it? Inflation is sticky. It's fair to say you want wages to come down a bit or not to rise as quickly, don't you? Because you put in a submission for the minimum wage to rise at the same rate as inflation. That would be 3.6%, so under that wages price index.
Oh, there's no doubt that when you're asking for people to not go backwards, you can do that with a smaller increase now than you could last year. The mathematics just show that clearly. So when we had those inflation spikes that started under the previous government, that did create a demand for us to be able to say to the Commission, the people on the lowest incomes, they've got the least capacity to be able to deal with what's happening with prices. And at the time, let's not forget what happened when, and I think you were there when the PM made the announcement, when he gave that answer absolutely during the campaign. And the response from Scott Morrison at the time was that this would be a disaster, that this would be incredibly dangerous, it would be economy wrecking. But what we've seen is wages start going up while inflation's coming down. You can do both, but you can only do both if you manage the economy responsibly.
All right. Do you
manage the budget responsibly.
I'll get to that, but do you accept that any of your industrial relations reforms have contributed to inflation or can?
Oh, I think there's a huge stretch that's there. Like the wage price spiral, people have stopped talking about it. There was all this pressure, if you do anything, that'll be the driver of inflation. There's been a series of drivers of inflation, some of them international, some supply constraints and issues within Australia, and some a history under the previous government of budget measures that were deliberately and knowingly inflationary. You compare that to what's happened since Jim Chalmers and Katie Gallagher started managing the budget, where effectively when extra revenue comes in, huge proportions of that extra revenue are being put back to pay down debt. We no longer talk about a trajectory to $1 trillion of debt. The reason for that is the way the budget was being really irresponsibly managed by the previous government is not how we've done it this time.
All right, well, we're going to see...
We've been paying down debt and that puts downward pressure on inflation.
We're going to see some spending on this Made in Australia program, though. What do you think of the criticism that you're playing favourites here? There's not proper tender processes around some of these grants and loans, etc.
Look, the favourite that we're playing is Australia, and we're making no apology for backing Australia. People, I think, are sick to death of the concept of, you need to be on a level playing field, and then you discover you're the only ones on it. What the Made in Australia policy is about making sure is to say we can build things in this country again. And countries all around the world, when Australia stopped backing Australian industry, they kept backing theirs. Well, we should have enough confidence as a nation, enough pride as a nation to say we can make things here too. It's not just good economic policy, it's also about economic sovereignty on a whole lot of areas. I want to be able to make sure that if you've got your solar panels on your roof, you've got an option in a serious way of getting them from a country, that China's not the only place making them available.